Thanks very much, Rich. Experience Columbus and the Greater Columbus Sports Commission are very proud to be sponsors of this special event this morning. And I have to tell you that I'm personally very honored to be introducing two gentlemen who have meant so much to our Central Ohio community for such a long period of time, going back to the late 60s and early 70s. Our first guest, and I'll bet you don't know this about him, is an attorney and a former special FBI agent, and I'm looking at him right now. After serving with the FBI, he joined Nationwide Insurance here in Columbus, where he became Vice President of Government Relations and began the company's corporate fitness program. In addition to his involvement in countless athletic and fitness events, he served as mayor and now vice mayor of Worthington for the past 44 years. In 1970, he created the World Weightlifting Championship event and invited all the star athletes in this field from around the world to participate right here in Columbus. The start of something very monumental for our community. May I welcome to the stage Mr. Jim Lorimer. Our next very special guest really needs no introduction at all. He came to Columbus in 1970, where he won his first Mr. World title at the same new event that Mr. Lorimer had created. This amazing athlete went on to win 13 World Bodybuilding Championships. Amazing. In addition, he became one of the top Hollywood box office stars of all time. He is a businessman, an investor, an author. He was elected the 38th governor of the great state of California and served in that office from 2003 until 2011. CMC, and dare I say our entire community, are very pleased and honored to welcome back to Columbus Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want to take a moment to, to recognize the commitment that Jim and Arnold have shown to Central Ohio over these many years. The collaboration between these two men has propelled what was a bodybuilding event in Columbus to the now Arnold Sports Festival that has grown to be the largest multi-sport festival in the world. Even more important for Columbus is that it's been held here in our city every year since its inception in 1989. An estimated 18,000 athletes will compete in 45 sports and events and attract more than 175,000 fans to this year's festival. And have you seen the downtown hotels lately? Walked into their lobbies? 89 hotels across the town will generate over 12,000 room nights this weekend. All downtown hotels have been booked for months now, and as Jim says, the new Hilton Columbus can't open fast enough. All these visitors have a significant economic impact on our community, and this year's event is projected to generate over $42 million in visitor spending. One of the things that Jim and Arnold will discuss this morning is their plan for international expansion of the Arnold Sports Festival brand with events in Madrid and potentially in Brazil as well.
I'm going to talk about that.
At the end of the day, however, to be able to call Columbus home to one of the greatest events in the world, one that other cities would die to host, and I hope they do die, is quite an honor for Columbus. So Jim and Arnold, we commend you for your commitment to Columbus over the past 40-plus years and look forward to continuing to grow with you long into the future. And now to lead our discussion, we have another heavyweight in his own field. He is a Harvard-educated journalist who is a popular columnist for the Columbus Dispatch. Please welcome Tim Farron, our moderator for today's event. So, Tim, it's all yours.
Thank you. And I'm told I should mention that, as is customary with the Metropolitan Club discussions, at the end of our discussion, we'll open the floor to questions from you, the audience. And that should be around 10 after 9, I would guess. But who knows? These guys may talk, and I'll just sit here in awe. So the first question that I want to ask is actually one that's been asked of me since I wrote a story reporting this. Yes, this is the most famous adopted son of America since Superman, but what the heck is this statue of this guy doing out in front of Veterans Memorial? And the answer, of course, goes back many, many years. And so I'd like to share with the audience, Jim, how you came to become a sports fitness promoter, producer. You were an FBI agent. You were an executive at Nationwide. At the time, this gentleman was lifting his first weight. How did this come about? It was the Cold War, was it not?
Well, it really is a longer story than you'd like to hear. But when my period in the FBI was involved primarily interviewing communists. And I was interviewing, they're always talking about the superiority of the Soviet system and how that system was going to ultimately prevail throughout the world. And of course, I didn't believe that. And I found out in the 50s, before 1952, the Soviet Union was never even in the Olympic Games. But in 1952, they showed up at the Olympic Games in London with a large number of people. And throughout the 50s, they had a governmentally supported athletic program designed to make a statement on the international level about the superiority of their system on this friendly field of sports competition. And they became increasingly successful. And in 1959, for the first time, they came to the United States for a dual track meet between the United States and the Soviet Union in Philadelphia. And I went down to that because I wanted to see how that came out. And on that weekend, our men's team managed to beat the Soviet men's team, even though they were professionally trained, because of the great intercollegiate and interscholastic programs we have. But on the same field, on the same day, our women's team was absolutely crushed. In the high jump, those of you who know that sport, the United States girl was doing the so-called scissors high jump, where you just get up and try and step over the bar. The Russian girls were doing a Western roll, jumping a full foot higher than the United States girls. And the next day morning, the Philadelphia Inquirer carried a headline because they combined the men's and women's scores that the Soviet Union had won this first sports international competition between the two nations. And those headlines go out across the world. And as I came back from that meet, I said, this is ridiculous. These women did not have a chance. There is no opportunity for them to compete at all. And so I formed the Ohio Track Club at that time for women's. And quickly, unfortunately, because of the dearth of leadership, I became chairman of the United States Olympic Committee for women's track and field. And throughout the 60s, I was running national championships in that sport. And so the people in the AAU knew I also liked weightlifting and bodybuilding. And in 1967, while I was still chairman of the U.S. Olympic Committee for track and field, they asked me to run the National Weightlifting Championships and Mr. America Championships here at Veterans Memorial in '67. So I've been in that building almost as long as the building's been there.
So let me interrupt. Governor, at that point, were you aware of this battle of the Titans, the Soviet Union versus the United States in the sporting field? Or you were a young man, very young man, teenager. Was it all school, sports, socializing, or?
Well, I was very much aware of it because, this made headlines, as Jim said, and we in Austria have also read about it, and in Germany. I remember that Jim and I, we talked about that many times, about his experiences then and watching those games and seeing what impact it had, and how usually countries like the Soviet Union used sports as showing their power and their superiority. And like Jim said, they were all, I would say mostly professional athletes, because I remember the weightlifters later on, when I became very friendly with them, told me that the reason why they broke the European record or the world record always by just 2 pounds or 3 pounds was because each time they broke the record, they got $1,000, an equivalent of $1,000. So no one ever wanted to break the record by 12 pounds or by 50 pounds or something, even though they could have. So for them, it was just always like in little increments. And there were enough competitions between the Russian championships and the European championships, the World Championships, the Olympics, and so on, that they kept making this money. And of course, the Soviet Union, from the 60s on, they basically ruled weightlifting. Yeah. And before then, it was the Americans. But the Americans lost the edge because the Americans did themselves in, because we had such idiotic rules when it comes to amateur sports, that a guy like Paul Anderson, who was the greatest lifter in America in the history, he went to Las Vegas to lift in Vegas in order to raise a little bit of money for a youth program for kids. Never took the money himself. I think he raised $1,000 or something like that, and because of that, the American Olympic Committee and the AU declared him a professional. And so he was out. He couldn't compete anymore. So the Russians, of course, were laughing about all this, and they had the greatest time because that made them the winner. So we did some crazy things, and luckily now the Olympics have become an event where anyone and everyone can compete if you make money or not make any money, and it's a much better atmosphere now. So this is really great. But the important thing is that by the time Jim ran the World Championships in weightlifting, which was in 1970, because of his great work that he has done at the national championships here and at Mr. America, he now ran the World Championships in weightlifting, and he again went back to them and said, look, I think the biggest draw would not be weightlifting, but it would be bodybuilding, actually. Why don't we have also at the same time the Mr. World competition? And that's exactly what they did. And all of a sudden, I got a phone call when I was working out at Gold's Gym from Jim, and I have no idea who Jim Lorimer was. And
did you know where Columbus, Ohio was?
I know where Columbus, Ohio was, because I was doing a lot of seminars and lectures around the country at universities about health and fitness and so on. But the bottom line is that he invited me to come there, and he invited other bodybuilding champions to come there. So the challenge was really only not do we want to go there, but I mean, how do we make it? Because I was competing at the Mr. Universe contest in London the day before. So time-wise, if you fly with commercial airlines, we would have never made it. But he had a great idea, as he always does, and Jim always looks at every problem as a problem to be there to be solved. And so he's always part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And immediately he figured out how to get a private jet to pick us up in New York and to fly us here. We competed here, those bodybuilders that came from London from the Mr. Universe contest, and I just then won the Mr. Universe, came here and won also the Mr. World competition.
And it was an important show for you as a bodybuilder, because that was the first time you beat Sergio Oliva.
Sergio Oliva was probably one of the most extraordinary bodybuilders of all times. I mean, he was enormous, he was talented, he was a weightlifter, so he had also those extra muscles in the lower back and in his calves and thighs that only weightlifters get. And he had the fire in his belly. He was hungry. He was also an immigrant that came from Cuba. So he was as hungry as I was. Here we are in a land of opportunity. Let's make it. And so there was all of that. And he beat me the year before in 1969, fair and square. He was better than I was that day, but I promised myself that the day will come where I will go and beat him. And so it was just a question. So Columbus was the day. And at the Mr. World competition, I won here. So not only did I think it was the greatest competition I ever entered because I won, but also because it was so well organized and we were treated so unbelievably well. And I just thought that the skills that Jim had in organizing and coordinating and all this, there was just the best atmosphere that I've ever seen in any competition was right here in that packed Veterans Auditorium. And so I told Jim after the competition, I said, look, when I am finished with bodybuilding competition, I said, I'm very ambitious about building the sport of bodybuilding and building fitness and strength training and all of this. I don't want to just lift for myself. I want to lift the entire sport. I want to do it with you.
So
You're
it wasn't
the right
just
person.
an offhand remark then?
No, I was serious about it because that's what you need. If you really want to move forward and if you look for a partner, I think it's very important to have the right partner. And I just felt that he would be the right partner. And we got along really well just with the little dialogue that we had and conversations. And so in 1975, I retired in South Africa at the Mr. Olympia competition. And I asked the IFBB to grant us the rights to organize the Mr. Olympia competition in Columbus, Ohio. We got the rights, and I traveled directly from South Africa to Columbus to give Jim that good news, and we started organizing from that point on.
Jim, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about the 1970s show. There's a little anecdote about why there were so many people showing up at the show. Right. Do you want to share that with us?
Well, I'm not sure Arnold knows that about that.
Well, we'll find out.
But at the World Weightlifting Championships, we had a 7-day competition. 5 days at Marchand Auditorium, and I always shoot 2 at Veterans Memorial. I told the people that we had to have, again, the Mr. World Championship in there, but also we had to have the event drug tested at Ohio State University. They agreed to drug test the weightlifters. And for the first 3 days at Marchand Auditorium, the auditorium was empty except for a very few fans. At the end of the 3rd day, the labs at Ohio State University called me. And they said, we're very sorry to tell you, but out of your first 9 winners, all from Eastern European countries, 8 of the winners failed the drug test. I had to tell the head of the Soviet delegation what had happened, and he was furious. He got together a little bit of a press group. The Citizen Journal was the morning paper at the time. The next morning, Thursday morning, the Citizen Journal carried it like it was the end of World War II. Drug scandal at weightlifting championships. That evening, Marchand Auditorium was full. It was full the next day. It was full when Arnold came there. Now, I don't know what lesson I learned from that. But I also,
publicity is good publicity.
We want to also mention that the international president of the IFBB is sitting at this table, Rafael Santoya. What is little known is that the International Federation of Bodybuilders is the 2nd largest sports federation in the world. He leads 182 nations in an organization. Only track and field has
184?
184, I'm sorry.
How can you make such a mistake?
That was 2 weeks
the
ago.
president here, Jim. Oy vey. Anyway.
So did you know this? That they weren't all there because of you?
I knew about the drug test, but I was still convinced that all were there because of me.
And that's true. That's true.
All right.
So, as long as we're making introductions, I should point out that the sculptor of the sculpture is here today, Ralph Crawford. Ralph, do you want to... And that sculpture, of course, is not only going to be installed on the lawn in front of Veterans Memorial, but it is the sculpture, in fact, that is handed out to the winners of the Arnold Classic bodybuilding show.
Not the same size.
Although you could probably carry it around.
Oh, yeah, I could, yeah. I also want to just say thank you to Ralph Crawford. Not only did he sculpt it, but this sculpture that you see today that will be unveiled, because we got such short notice, it was actually the sculpture that he was sculpting, and it was poured in the foundry for him. And that was actually his copy. And so it was called the artist's proof at that point, and because sculptors always have one of their work themselves. And so that one was in the middle of being made, and so when I got the phone call from Jim that, look, at the Veterans Memorial, they wanted to take that big sculpture of yours and put it in front of the Veterans Memorial, I said, to Jim, it takes months to do one of those sculptures. I said, let me check it out if that could be done. So Ralph was kind enough to let his go and get us that one and really speed up the process so it could get here in time. So thanks very much, Ralph, for your generosity. Thank you.
Tim, I'd also like to recognize the man who purchased the sculpture for delivery here. He's the president of the International Sports Federation of the World, Dr. Bob Goldman.
So we're talking about the Arnold Classic, the Arnold Festival. It didn't become known as that until 1989, of course. What happened in the intervening years between 75 and 89?
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, wait. We ran the Mr. Olympia contest when we started our partnership in 1976. That was the top contest in the world. And Arnold was committed, before he came into the sport, the top prize he ever won as a bodybuilder was $1,000. He said, the first year we run this, we're going to go to $10,000. In 3 years, we're going to be to $100,000, and we're going to go to $500,000. Now, right now, we're at $500,000 at the cash prizes on the weekend. But the people with the IFBB at the time saw that we were having great success with this new approach. And so a few years later, instead of letting us continue with the Olympia title, they said we should start moving this around. We should have it over in Europe. And so that sort of displaced us, and for some years we'd run Mr. Universe, we'd run different titles, and finally in 1989, Arnold said, I think we ought to get a title that they can't take away from us, my name. And so he was at that position then, and had been for some while, that having an event of his name, I carried, and right from the beginning, it was agreed that we'd have the major competition in spring, the Olympia competition would be the other major competition in the fall, and we had run the two major competitions in the world ever since to the benefit of the sport of bodybuilding. This year, for our event here, we have 700 amateur bodybuilders from 62 nations in here. Again, Rafael Santos, people from 62 nations coming into Columbus just from that one sport. And of course, altogether, as you know, we have 18,000 athletes in town on this weekend. And in London for the Olympic this summer Games is going to have 10,000 athletes in London. We have 18,000 athletes in Columbus, and 175,000 people coming in to see all the events of the weekend, 45 different sports and event in 5 different venues, and a 700-booth fitness expo right at the center of the largest fitness expo in the world, right here at the convention center. So that's been the growth of it, and maybe getting ahead of the game.
By 89, you guys were pretty good friends. At what point between 1970 and 1989 did you go from just business partners and acquaintances to people that I'm told you called Jim to ask him about if you should take the Terminator role?
Well, I think that it became very clear that, as far as I was concerned, that Jim was one of the most wonderful and most important, not only partners, but also friends of mine. Literally, that there's absolutely nothing that I could not discuss with him. And I think that because of his extraordinary background, and as a businessman and as a lawyer, having worked for the FBI, being extremely patriotic, I think, you know, being a Republican, being to the right, but also it was really extraordinary how organized Jim was, and I could really learn a lot from him, just alone on organization. How to organize your day. It's little things that I picked up because I was very hungry in learning, and I needed someone like that because when he said something, I would listen and I would do it because I respected him that much. So, for instance, I remember one time I was sitting in his office, just to give you an example, and he said to me, he said, well, we should call this 4 people, there's 4 sponsors in order to get the sponsorship up and blah, 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 all this. So I said, yeah, let me write that down. He says, no. So I said, what do you mean no? He says, we make the call right now. It's all about action now. He says, this way I don't have to write anything down. We do it now. And so we made the phone calls, and literally like 10 minutes later, we had sewed up those 4 sponsorships. We now had, 58 of $60,000 more. This was like, in the late 70s, early 80s. And then I went home, I remember that I was telling everybody that story. I said, this is the way we have to do things. He said, we don't write things down, we do it now, immediately now. And so that's the kind of a person he is about, and that's why you see him, that this competition is growing. And it's growing, and now you have like 200,000 people coming through this sports festival. It's the biggest sports festival, but you would never see him flustered. Because he's so organized, he sits there, he has his committees, he has the heads of committees there, and of course I totally get it that there's no other place in the world where you can do something like that, because Columbus in Ohio, I think, is a very unique place where you have so many volunteers, because you couldn't do it without those volunteers. So it's a very unique place, but Jim's leadership and his calm leadership and being so inclusive, I think, has a tremendous impact, and this is why he gets so much done. So I learned just things in that area. But also, if you look at his marriage, I mean, it's the most extraordinary marriage that you can ever see. I mean, the loyalty, the love that is there, the way they raised their children, the way they hung out together, the way they went for dinner. Every time I stayed at their house, I saw the dynamic, and I always admired it so much, of the way they dealt with their kids, or when the kids were not always doing exactly what they wanted to do, the way they were forgiving and the way they did it through dialogue and talk and all of that. It was just the whole thing. I remember even when I wanted to get married, and I was going out at that point with Maria for around 7.5 years or so. I believe in long escrows. But anyway, so I remember I sat with Jim in the jacuzzi at his house. And I said to him, Jim, I said, look, I said, I really feel like, no, he was not smoking a cigar. Maybe I was.
You were there.
Yeah. But then I said to Jim, I said, so what do you think about the idea of getting married? And, Jim, I mean, he can tell you what he said, but it was really one of those great conversations.
Arnold, you've been going with this girl for 8 years. I said, nobody, the relationship has stood the test of time. She's on the East Coast for the most part, you're here. I said, you have all the money you're ever going to need. Nobody can ever say you're marrying the girl for money. I said, this is your partner. You should experience all of life's processes. And that means get married, have children, have grandchildren. That's a full life. And he said, yeah. But then 6 weeks later, my wife and I get a telegram from Graz, signed Arnold and Maria, we're engaged. But the one time he didn't follow my advice was right before the elections that were taking place in 2003. He called me on a Friday, and he said, I'm really challenged and conflicted about this gubernatorial race, because I have been working with him in the political process for some while. And he said, I don't know just what to do. I said, I do not think you should run, Arnold. It is a terrible environment. They will come after you with everything they possibly can to hurt you. Your family will be hurt, your children will be hurt. And we continued to talk, but I could tell from his conversation. He said, I've talked to it about Maria, she's been there. She says will back me. And so I could see where it was in his gut. And I said, Arnold, remember the Browning poem. Of all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. And he said, send that to me. And then the next Monday night on Jay Leno, he goes.
Was that a tipping point there for you, or?
Look, I understood what Jim was talking about.
Yeah.
And he was looking out for me, he was looking out for my family. And I think under normal circumstances, he was absolutely correct. But, you know, that my makeup and my personality and my inside is so... I love when someone says it can't be done. I love when someone says it's impossible. I've heard this my whole life. Everything was always impossible. When I said as a kid I wanted to come to America, they said it's impossible. When I said I want to be a bodybuilding champion, they said it's impossible. It's an American sport. In Austria, you become a skiing champion, not a bodybuilding champion. And when I said I wanted to become a leading man in movies, they said they laughed. And they said, you with your accent, come on. And with your name, what is it, Schnitzel or whatever it is. And with this overly developed body of yours, I mean, Hercules movies were in 20 years ago, but now it's Dustin Hoffman, Woody Allen, the little guys. They're sexy. The women love them. Not your, I mean, look at your body. Jesus. So they said it's impossible. And the same was, of course, when I now wanted to run for governor. I mean, they said, Arnold, that's impossible. Don't do it. It isn't. And you have to start little as a mayor first, maybe, or city council, or maybe a state senator. And I thought that they're out of their mind. I mean, who has the patience to climb up the ladder like that?
You had been chairman, though. You had been chairman of the President's Committee on Physical Fitness, and I guess visited all 50 states doing that.
Yes, but I mean, you know, at that point, I was obsessed at the thought of being a public servant. I have, and it goes back not only to our conversations, but it goes back to my father-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, who started the Peace Corps and Special Olympics with his wife, and the Job Corps, Legal Aid to the Poor, and all those programs during the Johnson and Kennedy administration. And he gave a speech at the Yale University to the students, and he said that tear down that mirror. Tear down that mirror that makes you always look at yourself. And you will be able to look beyond that mirror, and you will see the millions of people that need your help. And that to me kind of like was really a very important point, because I said to myself, yeah, you know, he's right. You know, we got to go and stop just looking at ourselves and just thinking about ourselves. There's much more out there, and especially as an immigrant, you wanted to go and give back. I had this urge of giving back to my community, giving back to this country. So I jumped at every opportunity I could to become the national coach for Special Olympics, start after-school programs, going to all 50 states for the President's Council and promote fitness, and eventually run for governor myself. So to me, this was kind of like, yeah, there's a recall election. There's a good opportunity for someone that is not a right wing, but someone that is a Republican, a traditional Republican, that has a chance to now to win. And I jumped into the race. And there was really nothing at that point anymore that could stop me. My wife tried to talk me out of it, and everyone else, of course, tried to talk me out of it. This is, I don't know, you know, don't have the best background. So anyway, let's just go, let's just, you know, forget about this idea. But I couldn't. And so this next 2 months, I was working around the clock, and sure enough, my dream became a reality, and there I was. On October 7th, I won the governorship, and then November 17th, I was sworn in and became the 38th governor of the state of California.
And yet all through that time, you kept coming back to Columbus every year for the Arnold Festival.
That's right.
And the thing that's been remarkable, and Jim and I talked about this earlier, you don't just parachute in. You become involved. You really are kind of a people person. Jim and I have said, you know, it would be exhausting to the two of us to meet as many people and sign autographs and really get involved the way you do. Right. Is that a misperception on our part, or do you really get a lot of joy out of this?
Well, first of all, I get a lot of joy out of just working with Jim. And we work throughout the year. It's not just coming into Columbus. I come in during the year. And there's so much work that needs to be done always with preparing for the championships and really coordinating with all the various different sports organizations, and to really talk about and have brainstorming sessions of what the stage should look like, how the organization should run, and so on and so forth. And then also philosophical conversations about should we go also to other continents, you know, because we've talked for years and years and years, because the Arnold's Classic has become so popular that now, you know, Australia wants to have it, and in Japan they want to have it, in China they want to have it, in Moscow they want to have it, in you know, in Dubai, and in all these different places, in Spain and in Brazil and so on. So we eventually, you know, got together and had a big meeting and talked about that. And so the first competition was in Spain, of course, and Sendoya has done an extraordinary job there. And it was a packed house with all the champions from all over Europe. So this year we're going to go to Brazil, and the idea is to have the Arnold's Classic in every continent, and then have always the World Championships, to have all of those champions come together right here in Columbus, Ohio. So and Jim and I, we have made this commitment that we will always keep the competition right here in Columbus, Ohio. We've loved the city here.
And the original remains at Veterans Memorial, right, which is why that statue of this guy is there.
That's right. And let me build on that a little bit about why we want to keep the competition here. They've flown us down to Disney World, out to Las Vegas, and one of the first things I asked them is, I said, we have 700 volunteers in Columbus, Ohio, plus a team of 150 doctors and nurses who fan out through all of our venues protecting the welfare of these youngsters. Can you do that for me? And the concept of 700 volunteers, 150, doesn't relate to anything they know about, but it relates especially to Columbus, Ohio, as a community that gets up and gets involved, loves sports, and is willing to come out on this weekend and be all over the place. We have 18 vehicles out at the airport working all these 3 days. They're out there working right now. We have, again, tremendous number of committees. I have 100 chairmen who have subcommittees on this thing that work for us, that put it together, volunteers. And that's why it'll always stay in Columbus. And that's why for the rest of the world sees this model and they say, boy, we want it. I know that they offered Arnold $1 million to bring it to Moscow. And for Arnold, $1 million doesn't equate. For me, it does.
God, I feel so sorry for you. Such a poor guy.
Governor, you have a unique perspective on our community, having visited here so often over so many years. What did you think about this town when you first arrived in 1970, and have those perceptions changed?
No, I think it was always, I always looked at Columbus as a very stable city. And it always had great leadership. It didn't matter if it was a Republican India or a Democrat India. It just, there was this great partnership between the public and the private sector that is unlike any other place that they have here. And I think that it's, even though when the rest of the country you see, the economy dropping really badly, in Columbus, you see the effect, but you don't see it the same way. They have a tendency of smoothing things out, and I think it is because of this great partnership between the public and the private sector. People are very dedicated here. When you see the volunteers, for instance, over there at the Veterans Memorial, when you see, like Jim said, the doctors and the nurses, you see the transportation committee, you see security. I mean, you see all these people that are working tirelessly throughout the whole year. I remember one year we didn't have the competition here, which was in 1980. The Mr. Olympia competition went to Sydney, Australia. And the volunteers and the people here in Columbus were very, very upset. Very upset that they couldn't work on something. You see, they're so dedicated. This is what is the beauty here. And so I have always admired this city, and that's why I always loved coming here. And it's why I always thought that it was kind of like, felt like this is kind of my second home. Away from home. So, I will be coming here the rest of my life. It's just really a terrific place to come, and working with him and with Jean, with Jim's wife, who is the other partner in this whole thing, and who gives us always great recommendations and is always participating very actively in the decision-making process, and his son Bob, who is, so the whole family, as a matter of fact, as far as that goes. So it's to me a great pleasure, and this is why I enjoy coming here. Even getting involved in business with the Eastern Mall, I'm partner out there, and so on. So it's a great place. It's one of my favorite places in the world.
Jim, can we convince this guy to buy a home here and move?
Well, he owns part of Eastern Mall.
Right. I don't know, is that big enough for you?
It's nice to go out there shopping. I mean, we always go. I mean, my kids love it out there. I mean, every time when we come here for the Arnold's Classic, in the middle of the year, we go out there and we go shopping and have a terrific time. And my sons, they're here again, Christopher and Patrick, and we have a stand out there at the Arnold's Classic where they sell Arnold memorabilia, my two kids, because that's how I make them entrepreneurial and make them learn about business. They have to do themselves the inventory. They have to order all the items throughout the year. They have to make the decision what they sell there, really? Every single thing. And they can take 10% of the profits, and the other 90% goes to the after-school all-stars here in Columbus, Ohio. So that is the deal. So they learn about the entrepreneurship, but also how to do things for the community, and to understand that not every child is as fortunate as they are, where they have tutors and people that will help them, and that there were the parents at home and so on, that other kids need help, that that half of the kids come from families where both of the parents are working and there's no one there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that they need help, they need an after-school program, they need someone there to mentor them and to do homework assistance and to tutor them and give them sports programs in arts and music and stuff like that, and to get them off the streets so they don't get into trouble, because law enforcement has recognized that a long time ago that between 3 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon is the danger zone for children. So children don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something bad today. But sometimes they get into those situations because they're children. And so I think we have to do everything that we can to supervise them in the afternoon and to help them with their academics, and especially if they're immigrants and come from other countries, so they learn the language as quickly as possible, and so on and so forth.
Fitness, business, politics, Hollywood, those are all very competitive arenas, and you've achieved great things in all four. Which is the most competitive, and would you give any advice to people who wanted to enter one of those?
I think that if you want to be the best, I think all of them, take a lot of time, a a lot of dedication. And I think the most important thing is of all the different things that I do, it always ends up being the same thing. Are you passionate about what you're doing or not? And I just happen to be very fortunate that all of the things that I've done, I used to lift weights 5-6 hours a day, and I loved every minute of it because I have a different outlook on things. To me, working out was not, oh my God, I have to do another rep of squats or chin up or bend over rowing or deadlift or whatever. To me, I had a vision of the perfect body and winning the championships. And for me, it was every time I did a rep, every time I lifted another 500 pounds or so, it was one step closer to that goal and to make my dream become a reality. So I couldn't wait to do another rep because it got me a step closer. And the same is with acting. When you do the rehearsing, when you do the practice and the stunts, and you get hurt a lot of times. But now I just had shoulder surgery 3 weeks ago because of the last movie. It blew out my shoulder, and 4 tendons had to be reattached to the shoulder. It was a big surgery. So now I'm kind of cautiously running around and shaking hands very, very gently, and people are looking at me and says, "Oh, he's weird today." But anyway, but in any case, so those are the things that you go through, and I felt very passionate about about the governorship. I mean, think about it. That I jumped into that. First of all, I used $13 million of my own money to get elected because there was such a short window to get elected, so I didn't have time to do fundraising the way you normally do throughout the whole year. And then throughout, when I had propositions that I wanted to win to move the state forward, I put in at least another $15 million in those propositions. Altogether, we figured out, my wife and I, that we spent probably around $38 to $40 million of our own money. Now, this is money that you can't write off, may I remind you. Okay, so you have to first make $80 million to get to spend the $40 million when you're in the tax bracket. So, but something, every dollar was worth it. I've never thought twice about spending that money because this is the country that has given me everything that I have. And so for me to spend that money in order to run and to be able then to be a public servant and give something back was worth it. But it's what I'm talking about is passion. I have passion. I love what I'm doing. I loved sitting there every day in the governor's office, even though it was difficult at times. But I loved that. I loved acting. I loved doing the Arnold's Classic, coming here, talking to the bodybuilding champions, and meeting the fans and all this. I mean, I'm a very fortunate guy that I love all of those things, and that's why I'm, always full of energy and jump into those things with full energy.
That's great.
If I can add one thing to that. I had a person interview me some years ago, and to ask the question, what is the one thing that distinguishes Arnold Schwarzenegger from anybody you've ever known? Mm-hmm. And I said, it is his capacity for enjoyment. Whatever he does, he seems to enjoy it. And not in a hedonistic sense at all, just pure joy. And I called Arnold after that conversation. I said, Arnold, this lady asked me an interesting question. And he said, well, that's fascinating. He said, because she asked me what one word would I use to describe myself? And he said, joy. Now here's a man who defines himself in terms of joy. And that is an important part of his charisma, the attraction for all of us. Because here's a man we know is living life to the fullest and joyously. And I think that's an interesting insight into who Arnold is.
As well as you two know each other, I'm going to let the last question go to you. What question would you like to ask the governor, and what question would you like to ask Jim? Jim, go ahead.
You should have given me a little bit more warning. God.
One of the things I've admired among the many things of Arnold over the years is his goal setting. Ever since I first knew him in 1970, he was setting goals, and usually a 5-year goal. And I saw it any number of times. In 5 years, I'm going to go into promotion of bodybuilding with you. I'm going to go into films. I'm going to go into politics. So Arnold, here in 3 months, you are going to be 65. What is your goal in the next 5 years?
Well, I think that my goal, and we have talked about that, is to do all of the things that I have done throughout my life, to continue in show business, to continue with the Arnold's Classic, to continue in some form or the other with policy, to make sure that we have good government in our state and in this country, to continue on with the environmental work that I'm doing, because I think it's extremely important that we create a green energy future and not continue using fossil fuels from below the ground that pollute the world and make people sick and die and get cancer and all this. I want to continue on with the promotion of health and fitness all over the world. And most importantly, I want to work on my personal life, even though my wife and I, we go through a divorce, but I want to make sure that we have a family that really loves each other and that we have a great relationship, that we show, that Maria and I show our kids that we never fight, that we love each other, and that they can see that, and that so this whole thing doesn't have an effect on them. And so all of this, I think that the combination of working on my personal life and also on my professional life and all the other joys, I think now my goal is to put it all together and work on all of those things. But anyway, I should ask a question.
Yeah.
I just, Jim is now 85 years old. And
that's because I said he was 65. Right?
Yeah. We have exactly. That's right. Jim is so old. He was the waiter at the Last Supper. But anyway,
Godfather for Jesus' baptism.
he's so old. His back goes out more often than he does.
That's true.
Anyway, no,
Thank you. He'll be here all week.
But there's exactly. But no. But what interests me is about Jim, and I think that it will be interesting for all of you to hear. That is, what motivates Jim, and get up in the morning early, and have this kind of energy, and this interest in really doing better, making the competition better, everything that he does, do it better, and so on. What motivates him today?
Right. Well, I think it's a very interesting and sort of checkered background that you've seen I have. But it all seems to have come together for a reasonably, in my mind, good purpose, and that is of leading a very, very large fitness event for our community, which impacts thousands of lives beneficially. And if that isn't motivation for you to get up and enjoy life and keep pushing and always try to do better than your previous best, why, again, it's not who I am. And I just really, at this particular stage of my life, I don't have maybe 5-year plans, because that's into a philosophical question there. But I do enjoy life, as do you, and very much enjoy what I've given the opportunity to do, is to work with so many wonderful people. And here's an illustration right here this morning. Again, the Metropolitan Club and these great guests, Experience Columbus, all coming together at 8 a.m. in the morning to hear us talk. And we're very privileged, very grateful for that. And we thank you as leaders of the community for supporting what we've been doing as much as you have.
Thank you.
So now it's time for questions from you. If you have a question, please go to the microphone, introduce yourself, ask your question. As you line up, I should mention that the Metropolitan Club records all of its forums for TV broadcast on ONN, streams on the club's website, and on the Columbus Metropolitan Library's website. Finally, We thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments when you ask your question. These are the guys who are going to do the talking. So, fire away.
Yeah. Phil Sorrentino, Humor Consultants. You are two men with extraordinary vision, and you've been involved in government and politics. What do we need to continue to do and why? What do we need to stop doing and why? And what do we need to start doing and why to continue this free enterprise that has given us all so much?
I didn't hear the question. What was the question? I didn't hear it.
So you want to know what we need to do
In terms of government
to keep our system going.
Yeah.
In government and in
From
politics.
your perspective.
From your perspective, yeah.
Well, first of all, from my perspective, I think the most important thing is that Washington gets out of the mode of being so partisan. I think that both parties are doing a disservice to the country when they are party servants rather than public servants. I think that every elected official has to go to Washington or to Columbus or wherever, the Sacramento, whatever the capital is, and has to promise, and do promise when they get elected, that they're going to fight for the people. And that means fighting for Democrats and Republicans and all kinds of people that have different beliefs. We don't just fight for one philosophy. When you are in that position, you have to go and move the agenda forward. I mean, when you look at the United States now, that ever since Eisenhower complained that we're using too much foreign oil, at that point we used 20%. And he warned us it is dangerous and it is for national security's sake that we need to produce our own energy. Well, now we're using 60% of foreign oil. And Washington is sitting there, both parties, and they do not have an energy policy. No one knows in this country where we should get our oil from. Should it be more drilling offshore or onshore? Should we go and buy more oil overseas or not? Should we go and convert to solar, wind, and some other renewable sources? Should we build more nuclear plants, or should we get rid of the nuclear plants? There is no plan, period. Now, I don't have to tell you that you can have the best ship in the world, but if the captain does not know where he's going, that ship is going to drift around in the ocean, is never going to get anywhere. And that's what's happening in the United States. So now Iran is coughing, and all of a sudden the oil price is shooting up, and you people, most likely we have in this room enough money that we don't worry about the price at the pump, but there are a lot of people out there that are suffering right now. The economy was just about to come back. We have just put a few dollars more into people's pockets. Now that money is being ripped out of their wallets and is being sent to the Middle East. Now what kind of a policy is that? So I think they ought to be embarrassed in Washington, because we, the taxpayers, pay $2.5 billion to support that capital and all of that little doings there. For producing what? I guarantee you that in your company you would fire everybody right now if they perform like that. And everyone else here. And that's really the question. How do we get them out of that boat? How do we, the people, protest enough and send a message there rather than just electing different people? That's not enough. We got to really put the pressure on Washington and on the capitals. Get along, sit down, and negotiate, come up with compromises, and let's move the country forward. Not just only with energy, it's the same also with infrastructure. We are falling apart at our seams. We don't have enough infrastructure. We got to build like we have built in the 50s and 60s. I mean, that's what needs to be done. So those are the kind of concerns that I have. And that's why I jumped in and became governor, because in California, for instance, I sat down, we have 65% Democrats. I sat down with the Democrats and we started building infrastructure, $60 billion worth of infrastructure, more than any other governor. I got them, the Republicans and the Democrats, to sit down and to do that. Environmental progress, one of the most historic environmental policies we passed there together, we did that. Everyone working together. And there was so much work that went on there that we did together, both of the parties. So that's what you need to do.
Thank you.
Right.
Arnold Anthony, Warrior Group and Sword Sport. Arnold, Jim, it's good to see you. We know how hard it is to do the event as it is here in Columbus as far as just the amount of time you have to put in. And expanding to your new markets, how are you going to change your business model? Are they going to build the volunteer base, or are you going to have to really expand from the standpoint of your office and your locations?
So how are you going to change the business model, expanding?
The important challenge in expanding globally, and as we indicated before, we have a lot of requests for global expansion, is to get the right partnership. And for instance, in Europe, where we settled on Madrid, Spain, because we have this partnership of this leading man here, and you just have to make sure that you're working with people who know how to run athletic events and also know how to promote them. And those two combination of skills are important. As we're looking right now to Brazil, where we've taken some recent trips to Brazil, that'll likely be our next point of thing. But it's getting the right partnership who has those two particular skills, the ability to run a number of a variety of events and also to promote them properly.
All right.
George O'Donnell, CMC trustee. It's good to know your respective ages, and all of us know about 65 and 85. My question is, 25 years out, it's good to know that you have a son, Arnold, that's involved, and you have a son, Bob, Jim. Where do you see the Arnold Classic 25 years from now? Or if you'd like a shorter time period, 10 years from now?
I'll answer that. I'll start to answer that, Arnold. That is a very good question, because you have two, especially one very mature citizen here, and it's absolutely essential that we have a succession plan in place. And Arnold and I have discussed that on a number of occasions, because it just cannot be dependent upon one or two personalities. And we feel that we have, with good legal guidance, a very substantial succession plan in place. I am easier to replace than Arnold. But Arnold has established here a very great tradition, the Arnolds Sports Festival, which we feel will have momentum to stay in this community over time. There will be other people who are of celebrity status, who are committed to fitness, who will come in and be spokesmen, celebrity presences on behalf of the Arnold Classic. And in my own office situation, we have highly skilled people. The average length of service in my office is more than 15 years. Half a dozen people work 365 days a year. And we will start next Monday working on the 25th anniversary of the Arnold Classic. And we feel the momentum is there, the structure is there, the commitment is there. We want this to go another 25 years at a minimum.
I think that Jim is absolutely right. I think that the structure that was put in place does not rely on us. I mean, it is helpful, that we are pushing it along and doing our work and so on, but it doesn't rely on that in order to continue. That's the important thing. So when you look at, for instance, Nationwide Insurance, where the founder of Nationwide Insurance has passed away a long time ago, but look how Nationwide Insurance has grown and grown and grown because it was set up the right way. And we see ourselves the same way. And I, happen to disagree with Jim when he says that I'm, tougher to replace and, this loss will be heavier felt. I think that why we are such perfect partners is because every one of us has a certain value. And there's things that Jim does for the Arnold's Classic that I could never do. And there's things that I bring to the table that Jim cannot do. And together we are therefore perfect partners. So everyone has the same value. And I can tell you that I would never have been able to do the Arnold's Classic without Jim. And I feel, to go beyond that, I feel very much enriched having Jim in my life and having had him in my life since 1970s. I feel very fortunate, and I just wish that everybody has a friend like this by his side that always backs them up. So that's what I have to say about that whole thing, Jim.
I'm Emily Strome with People Magazine. Arnold, you've talked a lot about your family today, and your son Patrick showed his support last night on Twitter, tweeting that he was arriving in Columbus, looking forward to another Arnold Classic. What are you most proud of when it comes to your family?
Well, first of all, I think that my wife, Maria, has done an extraordinary job as a mother. I mean, it's really spectacular. I've seen that over the years, that she was the most selfless in a woman and has dedicated herself to the children. And I think because of that, the children ended up being really fantastic children. I mean, academically, they're doing well. Patrick, for instance, you just mentioned Patrick. He's on the dean's and the school principal's honor roll. Christopher is doing extraordinary in school, and Christine is at Georgetown University, and Catherine is at USC. She's graduating this year. And they're all fantastic human beings, good athletes and everything like that. And of course, the difficult moments that Maria and I went through, but we made sure never to have an argument in front of the kids or anything. So that we really, we hang out together, we have lunches many times together, dinners together. So the kids see that, and I think that has a great impact. And I'm so proud of my two kids because they are ecstatic about, for instance, coming to the Arnold's Classic. They've come here as babies, and every year I brought them here. And then eventually when they were old enough, they started having their own booth, like I said earlier, and they started selling things, and they learned how to sell things, the 2-for-1 deal. And we have right now, for the next hour, we have for 40% off, and all the little tricks that you do when you're a salesperson, and come back and, put your name down, and the highest bidder gets this, and all those kind of things. So it's wonderful to watch that, and so I'm extremely proud. But I have to say, because my wife spent 80% with the kids, and when you work, I'm in Sacramento and or on movie locations, I spent 20% with my kids of this time. So I would say that a lot of the credit goes to her, even though we work together and have done a great job together, but most of the credit goes to her.
Hi, I'm Andrew Kordek. I'm an active duty Army Nurse Corps. I'm currently taking leave from overseas from Afghanistan. These are a lot more serious questions, but I just wanted to come up and let Governor Schwarzenegger know that I started a weightlifting program overseas, and I used your Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding and Weightlifting, and I read that thing from like front to back, basically. And I started this weightlifting program in Afghanistan, and it's kind of hard when you go overseas when you're missing your family and loved ones. And I feel like that weightlifting program has changed a lot of us and helped us get through a lot going on over there. And we were on a mission for about 2 days straight, and I had my captain sitting next to me, and we were exhausted. He was, in the middle of the night, I can barely even stay awake. He's asking me, do we got squats tomorrow? And I said, yeah, we do, sir. And ever since then, it just seems like a lot more people are getting more involved with this. And I guess I just want to let you know that you made a big difference for us overseas. And they didn't believe that I was actually going to come here this morning to see you. And they still don't think I'm here because everyone took leave to go see their loved ones, and I decided to come here to the Arnold show. So... I was going to ask a favor if I could get a picture with you at the end of the day, so I can brag to my captain that I met you. So,
thank you. Well, thank you very much for what you said. And first of all, let me just say, I'm a big fan of you guys. I would not be here in this country, and I would not have the opportunity as an immigrant if it wouldn't be the brave men and women that have fought for the last few hundred years to keep this a free country and to keep this the #1 country in the world. When I say #1 country, there's never been a place in the history of the world that has had the power that the United States has, that has had the military might that the United States has. There has never been a feudal system, never a kingdom, or a dictatorship or anything that came close to what the United States is today. And it's all because of the brave men and women that have fought for this country for the last few hundred years. And that's why I have, ever since I've gotten here, always visited military bases. In my bodybuilding days, I went to aircraft carriers and the bases to teach them how to work out and how to use weights. Then when I promoted my movies worldwide, we had premieres. Like in Iraq, Terminator 3 was the first ones that saw Terminator 3 was the Iraqi soldiers. We hand-delivered the movie there and had a red carpet treatment for the men and women there, and had a wonderful time. I went back then as governor again to Iraq and visited the troops again to show my appreciation, or if it is going to Japan to go to the military base, or to South Korea, or to Germany. It doesn't matter where I go, we always visit military bases and pump them up and tell them thank you for the wonderful service that you do. And that's why for me, it's such a great honor to have my sculpture that they unveiled at the Veterans Memorial, because I'm such a huge fan of our military and of our veterans, because they've done such an extraordinary job. And when I was governor, I did like a whole list of things. I was probably a governor that has paid more attention to veterans and rebuilding veterans' homes out there and getting education for veterans and all of those kind of things, getting them certain privileges to say thank you for the great work that you've done and for risking your life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Arnold. I'm Ryan Gillen. I help run the ArnoldFans.com website. So we always love this opportunity to come here every year and spend some quality time with the man we admire so much. It's also great because I grew up in Columbus, and it's great to see such growth and prosperity. This event helps brings to the city every year. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask, because we're following very closely your comeback into to movies and Hollywood. I think everyone is excited about that, and just wanted to know if you wanted to talk about what it's like being back on set and what projects you're working on.
Well, I had a terrific time. Right after I was finished with my work as governor, to be asked by Stallone to be in Expendables #2. And so I flew to Bulgaria and worked there for a few days, and it was fantastic because, they had Van Damme in a movie, and Dolph Lundgren, and Stallone, and Chuck Norris, and all of those guys. I mean, every action hero of the ages between 30 and 100 were all there, on a movie set, and all having the biggest shootouts. And of course, you have a great time when you do that, with those guys. They're all very funny guys and very intense and masters in what they're doing, and also that was a great pleasure. And from that movie, I went on to do The Last Stand, which was shot in New Mexico, and I shot that from October through December, and that was a terrific experience to doing that, and that movie is going to come out in a little less than a year from now. They're working on editing now and the visual effects and putting all those things in there. And the next movie I'm doing, again with Sly, which is called The Tomb, which will be in Louisiana, and I'm looking forward to that. It's a prison movie where we both are caught in a most difficult prison to break out of, which is a huge ship out in the ocean, and so you can't escape. But of course, we figure it out.
Don't give it away.
And then after that, we do I do the Unknown Soldier, which is going to be with the Bandito brothers that just did The Act of Valor, which is a movie that's #1 right now at the box office, and is getting so much notoriety because they shot that movie for $4 million, but it looks like a $100 million movie because they used a lot of the resources that they got from the military and from they shot real action stuff, and so that's what makes the movie so big and very, very successful, great story and everything. So with those directors, I'm doing the movie The Unknown Soldier, which will start shooting probably sometimes in June. And hopefully by that time my shoulder will be okay, so I can do again many of the stunts, and so I'm looking forward to all that.
It's too bad you're slowing down.
I know, it's like terrible.
Thank you.
Next.
Hi, Mr. Governor, and I'm Ba Ling, and I teach economics here. Originally from China. I don't know whether you remember me. And I had a lunch with you and your assistant back 6-7 years ago, and also with Mayor Michael Coleman, and had lunch with you for 1 hour during something like such a setting in the convention center. And I brought my hometown Kung Fu master Shen, and he did very good and beat the Kongli team, the martial arts, kicking box, and events. Anyway, so I'm from China, from a city called Hefei, which happened to be the official sister city of Columbus. I live in Columbus for 20 years, and so I love your movie. I'm a big fan of you. But besides that, I listen every word you said early on in terms of your career, all the great things you have done, and particularly regarding your international program. Potentially, you'll be in Spain, potentially go to Brazil. But I think if you want to change the world, you got to go to China, okay? You can change a billion plus more people, their life, their impact. And so I travel back to China very often. Actually, I'm going back to China during OSU spring break just next week.
So you want to know if they'll bring an Arnold to China?
Yes, not just I want to know. And just as you said earlier, you're a person, Jim, you're both a person who like taking action. Instead of writing something down and you make a phone call. But before I came here last, I did write something down. And if you don't mind, and I'll prepare a simple letter for you and for Jim.
Okay.
And can I give it to you? Just in case, Jim, I would love to be your partner.
After we're done, we'll get in there. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for coming up to the microphone. And just let me tell you that I've been to China several times on trade missions as governor.
Yes.
And we will be back. As a matter of fact, China is one of the countries that has asked us to bring the Arnold's Classic there. And it will be with great pleasure to go there. So we just have to get the right promoters. And I know they have plenty over there. So we will make the right contacts. So be assured, I'll be back.
Thank you very much. I really want you to go to my hometown because my hometown is a wonderful city. Happen to be the sister city of Columbus. I do see that connection. I hope that works.
Absolutely.
Great. I'll be back too.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Schwarzenegger, I'm Phil Kordick. I'm one of the founders of the Columbus Cigar, Car, and Gun Cleaning Club. And a lot of the members have been texting me this morning to ask you a question. And overall, and you are truly a guy's guy, and you convinced everybody in California to vote for you. But how did you convince Maria to allow you to smoke cigars in your home?
That was one of the easiest things. And the reason is because it was her father who turned me on to smoking cigars in the first place. I remember when I was up in Hyannisport the first time, and Sergeant pulled out the box of cigars, and he said, he opened it up, and he said, he had always this habit of having a little cough before he talks, and he says, you want to have a little Cuban cigar? Are you man enough to smoke a cigar? And I looked around and I said, yeah, I guess so. Yes, and so I took the cigar, and then we sat out there at the porch and started smoking, and his other sons, I remember 2 of them came out and smoked a cigar, and then the next day he invited me again to smoke a cigar, and so then eventually it became kind of like I had 1 cigar every week, and then I had 2 cigars a week, and this is how it went. So by the time Maria and I, we moved together, we got married and moved together, you know, it would have been weird if she says, why are you smoking cigars? Because I would have said, well, your father is your idol. I mean, he's smoking cigars. I mean, I want to be like your daddy, you know. so it never came up. But naturally, I always was, as soon as we had a home, I always was a big believer in having an outdoor fireplace and having, you know, a little place outside, because it is much better smoking outside rather than inhaling your own smoke inside or having the smoke drift upstairs. When you have children, you shouldn't smoke inside the house and have the smoke drift upstairs to their bedrooms or so on. So it's not good for anybody. So this is why I always smoke outside, and Maria and I never had any problem with that at all.
You even set up a tent at the
Oh,
Capitol.
yeah, I mean, that's right. We had the tent at the Capitol. In the middle of the Capitol, there was an atrium, and there was enough space to put a tent there, and we stayed within the law. 20 feet it had to be away from the inside walls. So we measured it out exactly 20 feet, and that's what it was. And we had a wonderful tent there where we did a lot of the negotiations, and the legislators came down smoking cigars. And of course, the other legislators were complaining about it, that it were, that somehow they smelled it inside the building, even though we were outside. But in any case, so I always had a good time, smoking.
And that was bipartisan too, right?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Governor Schwarzenegger, Jim, you were probably, without question, the greatest chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sport and Bob Goldman International Sports Hall of Fame. Where I remember very well as special advisor, we were all there together with President Bush, the old man, and you said, what was the greatest day of your life? And he says, well, when I got in and tomorrow when I get the heck out of here. What did it feel like the first time you were sitting in that Oval Office? What was it like to have such carte blanche and to be such an honored guest at the White House with the President over and over again and the remarkable experience? What did it feel like the first time you walked into that Oval Office?
Well, President Bush Sr. was an extraordinary and is an extraordinary human being. I mean, I've never, ever met anybody like that. I mean, he and I clicked. He loved fitness. He loved sports. He appointed me to be the chairman. But not only did he invite me to the White House, but he invited me and Maria up to Camp David many, many times. And we had terrific times up there, skeet and trap shooting up there, and bowling, and horseshoe throwing, and working out in the gym with the Marines and with him, and playing volleyball, which was playing volleyball against the wall inside and stuff like that. And it was working out and fitness activities all day long. And it was also great when all the leaders came up. And they had their meetings, and especially I remember before the Iraqi war, in 91, all those cars go up there, and then I met all the people and listened to some of the conversations. But it was just wonderful of how trusting he was, and how he loved Maria, how he loved when I brought Catherine was just born, and he always had on his lap when there was mass on Sunday and so on. So the whole family was just really extraordinary. So it was a great honor for me that he entrusted, that he had that trust in me, that I would never talk about our conversations and so on, because you never know. I mean, I can tell you firsthand the amount of times that I felt like, when I read something outside the assembly, I said, well, I thought this was a conversation, a private conversation, and people just, go and eventually write their books or write their stories and or put it on the internet and stuff like that. So for him to have that trust was really very, very special, and I cherish the man, and I idolize him.
Thank you, Governor.
If I can add a President Bush story, please. In 1988. President Bush was running for president at the time. He was vice president. And as vice president of Nationwide Insurance, I invited him in to Columbus on the Friday before the presidential election. And he came in. I said, you're going to have, in front of Nationwide, we're going to have 10,000 people out there. And his committee agreed to come in. I said, but also I would like to introduce you, Mr. President, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they immediately agreed that Arnold Schwarzenegger should come in and introduce the president at Nationwide. So Arnold came in, he introduced Bush. They got on the plane after the Columbus thing, and they flew together that last day of Friday before the election to Illinois and to New Jersey. But it was on that flight that they discussed Arnold becoming chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. So a couple months later, Arnold had me into the Oval Office with the President. And Arnold said, Mr. President, this is the man who brought you into Columbus, Ohio. And the President said, yes, I remember that very well. I remember, great crowd, but as soon as Arnold introduced me, the crowd thinned out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jane Scott with the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Club. Quite a number of years ago, I interviewed Jim for a story for City Scene magazine when I was freelance writing. And he gave me Arnold's address and phone number, and I wrote to Arnold and asked for a few quotes. Well, to my surprise, he called me at Greystone Winery, which I owned at the time, and I'm sure he was confused because that wasn't what he was expecting. And my staff was certainly confused when they called down and said, Arnold Schwarzenegger's on the phone for you. And you were so gracious and kind, and it was a great interview. We had a lovely conversation, probably 15, 20 minutes, half hour. And this morning, I want to invite you to come back next year for the 25th anniversary, if you will. And this young lady I met this morning, her name is Haley Young, and she said, do you think I'll get to meet him? Do you think he'd give me his autograph? And I said, I think he's a really nice man, and I bet he will. So I'm going to send Haley up. Maybe she could have her picture taken with you. And thank you so much for being here today.
And with that, we're done?
We're done.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Good job, Arnold.
Just
One
a
more
couple
thing.
more comments. First of all, don't forget this packet that's on in front of your plate. There, the Classic has given everybody 2 tickets to get down to the convention center over the weekend. Take them with you. Also want to thank all these guys for coming in and sharing a little joy and passion. We got pumped up. Thank you. Yeah, there's coffee in the lobby if anyone cares for some.